Okay, good evening and welcome to Iyun with Benzion, Yevamos Vav number 6. Today we're going to talk about the probably the most controversial line on this daf, maybe in the Masechta. I mean, this is a really controversial line. What Rashi says here is very controversial, and the Gemara at the top we're trying to bring a proof that Esei Docha Lo Seish Bakaris, that the Gemara assumes on Daf Gimel and Beis that because we need a pasuk Aleha, teach me that you don't do Yibum but Makom Karis. So therefore, I would have thought at Ahavamina, we know from somewhere else that normally, under normal circumstances, essay is Docha Losei even when there's Karis. But because it's Aleha, you don't do it, and that's the reason for the first Mishnah. There's no Yibum Mechalitza when an erva falls to you for Yibum because Ein Es Docha Losei Sheish Bo Karis. If you didn't have the pasuk, I say it would be dochel seish bagara. So we're searching for that makor now. We haven't found it. So the Gemara is suggesting, and the Gemara really successfully does bring up proof. It has to be that when the Torah says ishimo v'tiro v'eshab sosai tishmoru, it's talking about where your father instructs you. He wants you to make a steak for him on Shabbos. He wants you to shacht the animal. He wants you to cook or grill the meat, which is a malacha. He wants you to do that. And therefore we essay. We docha Shabbos, Bishul or Avara, Los Yeshibo Kares. In fact, the Torah goes out of his way and says, next to Ishi Mo Vitiro, it says that you have to be guard Shabbos, you can't do it. So only by Shabbos that's true. But and Kibbut Avayim, only by Kibbut Avayim and Shabbos that's true. When it comes to everywhere else in the Torah, then we would say essay would be docha Los Yeshibo Kares. That's the Makor. The Gemara pushes away this proof because the Gemara says about the 8th line, Now I told people to think about at the beginning of the Daf Yomi shir, what does the word hechsher mitzvah mean? What does the word hechsher mitzvah mean? What does it conjure up in your mind when you say hechsher mitzvah? Normally, if I heard the word hechsher mitzvah means it's preparation, right? Just like we learned by in Maseches Beitza, we learn machshirei ochel nefesh. Machshirei ochel nefesh is sharpening your knife, right? Ochel nefesh is when you actually shech the animal, you cook the food, where you're preparing it, but sharpening a knife is preparatory. It's the Gemara in Shabbos, Daf Kuf Lamed also talks about machshirei mitzvah. Hechsher mitzvah is preparatory. It's preparing yourself to be able to do the mitzvah, not that you're doing the mitzvah. Rashi says exactly the opposite over here, and this is what's so troublesome over here. He says there's in Yom and Shabbos, can hechsher mitzvah Shabbos, you have to do it. If your father wants you to invest the piece of steak, there's no other way to do it. He's not going to eat raw meat. You have to grill it. You have to put it on the George Foreman, which I'm going to do tonight, or you have to go and buy a gas or an electric grill. You have to put it on the grill. You have to do that. So there's no other way of doing it. So therefore, there we would say, Esei dochalo seish bakares. Masha'enkin by Yibum, who's to say, Yibum, I don't have to do Yibum. I can do Chalitza. Since I can do Chalitza, right, you can take off his shoe and spit in it and avoid Yibum, so I don't have to do Yibum. So you can't bring a proof that by Yibum I would say Esei dochalos yishbal kares. That's Rashi. Problem is the obvious problem. Hechsher mitzvah means preparatory. It doesn't mean that you're chayiv to do this mitzvah. That's not what it means. It's not what Hechsher mitzvah means. Rabbeinu Chananel gives a different explanation. I'm not going to go into that. There's ways to be miyashiv Rashi, but I'm going to offer my own explanation, which is a simple explanation of this Gemara, and it really touches on a more fundamental issue in the concept of Esei dochelos, that we know from the Gemara in Sukkah, right? There's a concept of mitzvah haba be'avera. Normally, what happens when we have a mitzvah essay and you have a los essay at the same time? Is that okay or not? We have been assuming this whole daf in Yevamos essay dochelos. We learned it out from sitzis, kilayim b'sitzis, right? You're allowed to wear a beged of linen sitzis that has wool strings. Because essay docha losa say the essay of mitzvah sitzis is docha losa say of kilayim. What about mitzvah ba'avera, right? If you mitzvah lulav hagazel, it says sukkah gzula lulav hagazel, right? Lulav hagazel, the Mefarshim explain, is that when you're taking the mitzvah, how you yotze the mitzvah of lulav, when you pick it up, the agbiyah, when you pick up the lulav off the table, you're makai the mitzvah. At that time, you're kona it b'gzela. You're kohen big zeil, whatever kinyan zeil is. We'll learn in Mesachas Bava Kama. You're kohen at the same time. So therefore, as the mitzvah of avera, the Gemara assumes you're not yotzei the mitzvah. The Gemara says that's what the Mishnah said. Lulav hagazel, you're not yotzei. Mitzvah baba avera, you're not yotzei. So why do we have? What is the difference in the concept of esi say and mitzvah haba avera? Here is where it's important to see hechsher mitzvah or not, because that's what the Gemara is saying over here. When it comes, the father says to you, shechta, an animal, or cook some meat for me, right? When are you mekayim mitzvah kibbut avayim? Not when you cook the meat. That's not when you're mekayim the mitzvah. You're listening to what your father says is not the mitzvah. The mitzvah in the Mesachas Kedushin, Daf Lamed Beis, Lamed Gimel, Lamed Aleph, I forgot what it says, that the mitzvah is, there's 6 things. One of them is achlehu or mashkeu. 2 of them are giving him to eat or drink. When you give him the food, you put the food on his plate, or you feed it to him because he's an older man and he can't eat himself. You put the pureed applesauce in his mouth. Then you're mekayim the mitzvah. You're not mekayim the mitzvah when you go to the George Foreman and you put the piece of meat. That's not the mitzvah. That's a hechsher mitzvah. It's preparatory, like this simple explanation. It's preparatory. So in a sense, that's what the Gemara is saying. It's better over here. Here you could say the essay is dochel kares because hechsher mitzvah, because at the time that you're doing the mitzvah, the avera of grilling, right? You're not doing the mitzvah. The mitzvah is at the same time, so there's no chisar in a mitzvah of avera over here. Mitzvah of avera, like the Gemara is very clear in Mesachas Sukkah, is exactly the exact same time you do the mitzvah, you do the avera. But here you're doing the avera first. And it allows you, it's a hechsher mitzvah, it allows you to do the mitzvah. So maybe over here, there's more reason to say, that's what the Gemara is saying, maybe here there's more of a reason to say it would be okay, because it's not at the same time. Mitzvah ba'avera is like the Gemara compares it to Hashem. It's like when you bring a korban, and the korban has a mum in it, or something like that, right? You bring the korban, and the korban has a mum. So when you're bringing the korban, there's a defect in the korban. It's lacking in the korban. It's like minaveh. It's not a mitzvah. The mitzvah, at the same time as avera, is not a mitzvah. But here, the mitzvah, after you do the avera, you're still doing the mitzvah. And you're not, when you're doing the mitzvah, you're feeding your father, you're not doing the avera anymore. So therefore, I could say it's a hechsher mitzvah. At the time you're doing the avera is the hechsher mitzvah. It's not the mitzvah itself. And since they're not at the same time, maybe there's more reason to be a mekel. Mashen came by Yibum. Yibum, when the isser of aragus is when you're boel the woman, when you're boel the Yevamos. And that, when you do the bia, that's how you're Makayim, the mitzvah of Yibum, that is the erva. The erva is the bia, is the sexual act. So therefore, since you're doing it at the same time, so therefore it's a mitzvah of avera. So therefore, there's less reason to assume that essay will be dochalos shishbakaris. Even over here it would, because it's not happening at the same time. It's not a mitzvah of avera. There it would be mitzvah of avera. We have to discuss what the difference between mitzvah of avera and essay dochalos a little further. That's Iyun Benzion for tonight. Have a great night. See you later. Bye.